last but not least, Simone Mori, Executive Vice President and Head of European Affairs at Enel, representing our co-chair Enel in ECRE. Okay, so we're complete. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I've given them a warning, so don't think me totally rude when I'm going to ask what I'm going to ask now. They've all been warned. And it's basically something that the Chancellor said in her speech that just startled me. She mentioned that it is the G20, the group of 20, that produces 3/4 of all the greenhouse gas pollution in the world. And at the same time, it is the G20 that now wants to save the climate, save the planet. So for me, it is like, is the G20, are those that produce most pollution the right people to find the answers to that problem? That is a question to all of you, so we can get that out of the way. Are we the right people to make the right suggestions? Who is brave? Who would like to start?
Who else?
Act differently. Let me turn to Dany, Qian, because obviously from JinkoSolar you can represent the business side as well, and you're another co-chair of the ECRE task force. You helped shape the B20 recommendations. So tell us, how do you think that business can best contribute to actually implement the Paris Climate Agreement?
Let me first answer your first question, because I know I'm the right person to answer your question. It's a very good question, because first, because I'm from China, you know that China is one of the fastest growing countries and also one of the largest emission producer. So actually this is a fair game. That is, you produce the emission, you have the responsibility to clean it. So, but in the past, it's really a conflict. We cannot make it possible because we have no other solutions. That our energy system is basically worked in one way, that that utility generated powers, and normally by burning fossil fuels, and the economies grow under these models. So if you want the economy to develop, you must have electricity as drive engines to make it run. But the electricity is from the fossil fuels, to burn the fossil fuels. So it's not possible. But then we have the renewable energy. But for decades, we have been told that it doesn't make economic sense to switch to renewable energy because it's too expensive. But actually today, that's no longer true. And thanks for the continuous investment and the economies of skills. For example, the solar power is now undercutting coal and becoming the cheapest energy in more and more regions, from South America to USA, from India to Middle East. For instance, I just give you an instance that in Mexico, we quoted 2.91 cents per kilowatt hour, and in US and in India less than 4 cents, and in Middle East, in Abu Dhabi, the lowest cost is 2.42 cents per kilowatt hour. That is 1/3 of the coal power, the local coal power, the electricity price. So because that's happening. We have solutions. We have already found solutions to develop economy with the least almost zero impact on the climate and the earth. That's why in Paris Agreement, China makes such ambitious goals and commitment, because it is backed by these cost-effective, more economic sensible and applicable renewable energy technologies. That's why our president can sign the agreement, and actually we have a very clear roadmap to implement it. So from business perspective, you know that in Paris Agreement, that the governments lay out essential goals, but the promise needs to be followed by action. The implementation of the Paris Agreement largely depends on the involvement and the engagement of business community. So for business, I think starting from your own business and your own expertise experience, companies and the private sector can do a lot of things to contribute to the Paris Agreement, to the implement of the agreement. For example, steer your capital towards investment in clean energy or low carbon technology or business, and purge and increase the use of renewable energy to become carbon neutral. Like we know, like the Apple, Google, Walmart is underway to run entirely on renewable energy. And report emissions and disclose all climate relevant data and information. And the business should should comply and align with the government energy policy. Also, we can. Also, you can adjust and adapt your business model, your operation, your supply chain, and your investment portfolio to seize this opportunity of energy transition. So this is for common business, for general business. For renewable energy company like us, we can do more. And we should assume our global leader in the transition to a low carbon and sustainable economy. For example, we can take a responsible approach to lobbying our climate actions. But the most important thing for us, or the most important task for us, is to increase the investment in R&D to further drive down the cost of renewable energy. Like the solar is free, it's endless. It's dispersed everywhere and is extremely clean. So why we still use the high emission, high cost form of energy like coal? We should, for us, we should accelerate and speed up the cost down and to make it more cost competitive. So our ultimate objective is to make solar zero cost, zero emissions throughout its overall lifelong circle, from its production to installation to deployment and to its over its 30 years service times. So this is what we can do to contribute to the implementation of agreement.
Okay, thank you very much for this. And of course here, because you mentioned carbon, and Mr. Edenhofer already also mentioned about the sort of phasing out of fossil fuel subsidies, at the same time carbon pricing. I know that in China there is now, or they're about to start, an emission trading system, and the B20 has created a special platform, a dialogue platform on that matter. So what does this platform hope to achieve? What should the G20 do in order to enhance and help the carbon pricing idea, that it actually helps the climate?
Yes, China has announced it starts emission trading systems. And if so, it is expected to become the world's largest carbon market. For us, that's the challenge is how to implement it, how to roll out the systems. So we know that first, it gives the world a very strong signal that China has taken up our own responsibility to deal with the climate, and actually we have taken the steps forward. And the challenge is how to make it happen and how to meet our commitments. Actually, the carbon pricing is one of the most important energy instruments for China's development towards a low carbon and sustainable economy, also to help us achieve the ambitious goal, a climate goal. So, but this is quite new for us, for China. So we want the G20 initiate a dedicated dialogue and platforms, and increase their bilateral or their multilateral international cooperations, and by doing that, China can learn lessons from EU and other regions who has more experience in the rollout of their emission trading systems. For example, like the capacity building, like the carbon pricing setting based on the robustness of the data collected, like the rules and the procedures and the guidelines designed for business to follow and comply with, and also their how to regulate and manage the markets, and their such kind of things, etc. So also, yes, we can learn from the EU that to use mixture of various mechanisms like auction, like benchmark or metric setting. Therefore, China can shorten the learning curves, and we can avoid or overcome the fragment approaches. So we need G20 to establish or set up such kind of platform to help China to implement the system gradually but also smoothly.
Mr. Edenhofer.
Yeah, I would like to emphasize that this is really very exciting to see this emerging carbon market in China, which indeed will become the largest carbon market worldwide. But what we see is, at a global scale, there are many emerging carbon pricing schemes. And here we have to take into account also national diversity. Some countries, like China, is implementing a cap-and-trade system. We did also this in Europe. But in some parts of the world, we have carbon taxes, like a very successful one in British Columbia. And it is important to understand that the Paris Agreement basically relies on voluntary contributions of the countries. And therefore, they will now implement different and diverse carbon pricing schemes. And it is then an important challenge to organize a ratchet-up process that these carbon prices, it could either implement it via taxes or cap-and-trade systems, can converge over time. So this cannot be implemented immediately. We have one global carbon price tomorrow. This is a kind of an evolutionary process, a very important one. But it is very encouraging what we see here in China. And in a few years from now, we have the largest carbon market worldwide.
I hope so. Mr. Benner, you wanted to intervene as well.
Yeah, so it's very exciting to hear about what's happening in China, about the emission trading and different markets. I think certainly we very much encourage the move to carbon pricing. But I would say that there are also more urgent things that could be done today that would get one of the objectives of the Paris Agreement, which is to peak the emissions as early as possible. And this could be done without touching the economic growth and using today's technology. So what are the kind of measures that we are proposing? Obviously, it's still taking into account the fact that we need to have the carbon prices in the future. So one of them is energy efficiency. Energy efficiency could represent half of the efforts to go to this emissions peaking. Another one is renewable, that we are seeing the G20 very heavily engaged. Then you have other things that G20 has been advocating, like the fossil fuel subsidy reform. And you have also methane emissions from upstream oil and gas operations. This is certainly a very important issue that we are working on today. And then finally, coal-fired power plants that have low efficiency have to be completely stopped down.
Drastic measures, but probably needed. Mr. Mori, you wanted to add something?
Yes, about the Chinese experience. I think that this is an experience that should be explained and communicated a lot, especially here in Europe. In Europe, we have the most rooted and liquid carbon market in the world. Unfortunately, there is quite a strong skepticism about the evolution of carbon market. We know all the problems that market had, but we are pretty much convinced that we should work in order to improve the quality and the dynamics of this market. We know more or less how to do. It's not it's not rocket science. We know what is lacking. And of course, the final goal should be a kind of global carbon currency that could help companies all around the world in taking the right investment and disinvestment decision. That should be one of the major pillars for promoting decarbonization in our sector. The other three being basically long-term price and contracts for new renewables, stabilizing the price. The second one is promoting energy efficiency, and the fourth one being trying to get the most from the spillover of decarbonization on the power sector by developing the use of electricity in the other sector of the economy, including heat and cooling and transport.
Right, I think about just enough time left for you to somehow give your personal recommendations to the next G20 or B20 groups coming up in Argentina and then in India 2019, because obviously what we've been talking about, like all the big topics, but in this particular case with climate change, resource efficiency and energy policies, it is an ongoing process. It will take a bit of time. So what would you like to share as your key message of this process that you were engaged in your various roles? And maybe also after these 2 days, because a lot of the topics have been touched upon and maybe there were some new findings, maybe starting with you, Mr. Bock.
Yeah, maybe just quickly two thoughts. One is really about business and our intrinsic motivation to save resources and to save energy. I think this is just a cost factor, energy. So for us, it's good business to consume less or do more with less even. In that context, I think it fits really neatly with the objectives of our task force here. The other thought is really about consumers. We haven't really talked about people. And people are finally the ones who consume energy, or convert energy in a certain way. We have 600 million people in Africa who have no access to electricity. That has to be covered as well. It's also covered in our paper, and it's certainly not a solution to build coal-based power plants now in Africa. That would not really serve the purpose. We have people in developed countries, like in Europe or the United States, who are extremely driven by low energy costs. So as soon as the price at the gas station in the United States goes down, people buy bigger cars. The same, by the way, happens in Europe. So how do we change behaviors to really, at the end of the day, drive change to a low-carbon economy that cannot just deal with the business environment? It also has to deal with people, with consumers and our behaviors. And I think this has to be kept in mind as well.
Very good.
So along the same line, the Sustainable Development Goal number 7 has put some very ambitious targets in terms of energy access. I think that we need to see how we can work together to achieve those goals within that time frames, and also look at the implication of that energy access on development.
Mr. Degenhardt.
Yeah, it's all about information, not only to the government, but also especially to the public. And we are talking here about 2 degrees, 3 degrees, 4 degrees Celsius global warming. If 3 or 4 would materialize, we would probably talk about a couple of 100 million refugees. People who would lose their home, not in 100 years from now, but in 20, 30 years from now. That would create a complete chaos, having 50 million refugees in the world today, and we cannot handle them. So we better speed up. I think after China, Germany, now Argentina, the what has to be done is relatively clear. We have to work on the how, and we have to work on the commitment and the information of all the people to get their buy-in.
Mr. Edenhofer.
Yeah, I would like to see indeed that for the G20, the Sustainable Development Goals become an important focal point, including the Paris Agreement. And it would be fantastic if the G20 could become a platform, not to talk about what should we do, but to talk about how should we do it? And here I would like to highlight one important thing, and this is very much in line with what has already been said. So if you take into account that a carbon price roughly around $20 to $30 per ton CO2 would provide the revenues to provide universal access worldwide to clean water. And it's not saving the world, but it's all about improving the living standard and the situation of the poor people, in particular in Africa. This would be, from my point of view, a very, very compelling vision for the next 2 decades, providing clean energy, clean water, sanitation, transport, access to IT. And this is something which is, from my point of view, really a realistic utopian vision, a great vision, a grand picture, and I hope that the G20 could be a platform where not only we share this vision, but also we can measure the progress we made, hopefully, over the next 2 decades.
Thank you very much. Dany, Qian.
I agree with you that that must be a big solution. And to deal with the climate change, you cannot rely on one technology or one industry. It cannot benefit some companies and or some industries and hurt others. So we need a more cross-industry cooperation, and we need a different technology can interact together. And so for the future, we lots of things to do. But one thing is for sure, that we must be more open, more accountable, and more transparent.
Thank you. And last but not least, Simone Mori.
Tackling climate change and bringing electricity to the 1.2 billion people who don't have any kind of energy are basically the same target. Technology is there. Private finance may be quite easily mobilized. I tend to be quite optimistic on that. What we need is a smart, stable, coherent, and long-term regulation.
All right. It's gone awfully quiet in here. We have to change this right away with a big round of applause for this panel. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Thank you all for participating.